The Watership Down podcast is intended for listeners who are familiar with the plot. There will be spoilers. This episode is scripted, narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 170, in which we will be looking at part 2 of the 2016 British Broadcasting Corporation radio play. First of all, though, a couple of corrections from last week. Sean Higgins, who introduced me to the 1984 Australian radio play, has pointed out that the crow attack before the beanfield was actually first portrayed dramatically in that version, rather than in the 2016 radio play. I managed to miss that while swapping back and forth between versions. Sean also pointed out that when the narrator talks of Lord Frith telling El that one day his tricks will go too far and the world will be rid of a rascal just before Hazel's raid on Nuthanger Farm, those words are partly borrowed from Prince Rainbow in the book, when he speaks to El in the tale of El and the King's Lettuce. Thank you for those observations, Sean. So, on to part 2. The 2016 BBC Radio 4 radio play, Part 2. Part 2 of the 2016 BBC radio play of Watership Down was first broadcast on Sunday the 13th of November 2016 on BBC Radio 4. Its last broadcast was on Tuesday the 24th of December 2019 on BBC Radio 4 Extra. You can listen to Part 2 on YouTube at the Laypine Radio Play Archive. There will be a link in the notes. After some introductory music, the narrator tells us how the great Lord Frith gives some the authority to lead, to some the power to fight, and to some the wisdom to reason. No prizes for guessing who she is referring to. But to some, she continues, is given the blessing, or curse, of dreaming, by which she also means more than just ordinary dreams. Fiver is dreaming, and in his dream he sees what happened to Hazel when he was shot at Nuthanger Farm. He comments in horror, as if watching a film he cannot change. The tension is broken by the BBC Radio 4 convention of having one of their continuity announcers giving us some brief opening credits. And now it is daytime, and the narrator continues, telling us of the shock of the loss of Hazel. Bigwig and Dandelion are discussing their predicament. Bigwig points out they only have 2 hutch does to show for Hazel's loss. Clover, one of those does, has overheard this and points out that her friend Laurel was left behind. This is the same rabbit who had to be left behind in the book, only there Laurel was a buck. Bigwig's apology is interrupted by the arrival of Keehar, who tells them that Holly is returning to the Big Hill, as she calls Watership Down. A gathering is happening underground. Holly asks if they should wait for Hazel and is just told he is not here right now by Bigwig. In the book, Fiver has just discovered the still alive Hazel, as Holly, thinking Hazel is dead, gives his account of the expedition to Ephrata. Here, Fiver is still grieving, as Holly is prompted to report without being told what has happened. Holly says that Silver is wounded and Strawberry is sick, and they have no does. His account of Ephrata is shared with Strawberry, and is a very good summary as they explain the nature of that terrible warren and name General Woundwort. Holly says that most rabbits in Ephrata can only do what they are told. And suddenly we are in Ephrata with him and Strawberry as they remember a conversation with the doe Heisensley. She explains the nature of the place to them and how it changed when the general came. This is a change from the book, where Woundwort founded Ephrata along with his followers. She says the system is breaking down, going on to tell them about the request of some to leave a few days before. Holly says they had hoped this would help them when they met with the council, but the first thing they see on arriving is Blackavar being taken away begging for forgiveness. Apart from Heisensley, for a reason that will become clear later, the Ephrafans of this version all sound very much like they come from the north of England, while her northern accent is very mild. In fact, Campion and Blackavar sound like they're from the northeast of England, at least to my southern English ears. I suspect that all this is because, as I said last week, accents can send a signal. And as the English saying goes, with apologies to any northern listeners, it's grim up north. As soon as Holly tries acting as an ambassador, he is interrupted by Woundwort, who makes it very clear what their position is. Strawberry's eventual appeal to animality is met by an implied threat from Woundwort that is an addition to the book. Strawberry, back on Watership Down, tells how Holly came up with a plan, taking advantage of the Ephraffan habit of obeying orders to give them the opportunity to make a run for it. We hear their pursuit in the rain, and just as they think they will have to turn and fight, they reach a steep bank that leads to the Iron Road. All this has conformed to the book, but now it is Strawberry who, in a moment of courage, tells Holly and Silver to cross the Iron Road. The messenger of Frith arrives, described by Holly as being as big as 1,000 krokodil, a moment of a rabbit counting above 4 in the book as well that I had not spotted before. We hear the sounds of a 1960s British rail steam train. Having told their tale, Bigwig informs them that Hazel is gone and that Fiver is existing in a dream of grief. And now we are in that dream, which is quite faithful to the book, except that the black emissary intervenes, asking Fiver if he wants to understand what the human is saying. The human, for some reason, also has a Northern English accent, which is out of place for a Hampshire agricultural worker, but he sounds appropriately cruel and does mention the bloody hole. I believe the 1984 Australian radio play featured the human as well, but that phrase was not used. On being woken by Blackberry, Fiver insists that Hazel is not dead. On returning to the site of Hazel's being shot, they discover him in the drainage pipe and manage to get him to the foot of Watership Down. Kihar arrives and extracts the shotgun pellets. Then they take shelter at the foot of the hill. What follows is an extended performance of one of my favourite sections of the book, the discussion between Hazel and Fiver in the ditch at the foot of Watership Down about the nature of reality and the afterlife. The episode of this podcast on that chapter of the book, episode 26, is still one of my favourites, being, perhaps not entirely by coincidence, the last one I recorded before our lives were turned upside down by my late father's stroke in August 2021. I recommend it. The next day, Hazel returns to the Down in a scene where Bigwig's banter-filled greeting is another example of his authenticity to the book in this version, even though their conversation is an addition to the book account of Hazel's return. The narrator makes it clear that Hazel's survival after his mad dash to save his comrades has cemented his heroic status on the Down. It is now, back on the Down, that Hazel outlines the objectives of the proposed raid on Ephrafa to Blackberry, rather than in the ditch at the foot of the hill. Later there is a gathering in the honeycomb, at which Hazel announces his plan to return to Ephrafa. Holly objects strongly to the whole idea, and several voices speak out in support of him. However, Dandelion supports Hazel, and Blackberry arrives to say that Kihar has agreed to help them. Fiver, saying that he has no misgivings, clinches it, and he promises to let them know if this changes. And then Bigwig says he is going as well. By announcing the plan at such a gathering, the Hazel of this version has risked his authority far more than in the book. Later, above ground, they prepare to leave for Ephrafa, and Holly begs Hazel to be careful. The narrator describes nature as June turns into July, and the group from Watership Down are now at the Iron Road. There has been no encounter with a fox on the journey. Hazel tells Bigwig that it has to be him who carries through his plan. Then Kihar arrives to tell them they must cross the river using something she calls a bridge, as the river is too fast. Even for the occasionally reckless Hazel, the bridge is a bit of a challenge, but Bigwig leads the way. On the other side they will be safe from Ephrafa. And then they find the punt, which is a bit confusing because it has to be on the other side of the river they have just crossed, and there has been no plank bridge for them to cross the river again. Kihar educates them on how a rope can prevent a boat from floating away down the river, and the plan to escape from Ephrafa rapidly follows. Bigwig sets off, though even at this point it seems not to have been certain who would be going into Ephrafa. In the book, Bigwig knew very well it would be him, hence his demanding to hear the tale of El Ahrar and the Black Rabbit of Inlay. There is some tense transitional music before the narrator tells us that it is dusk when Bigwig arrives at Ephrafa. His job interview for a place in the Ephrafa Alzara is very true to the book, and we get another Bigwig snarl as he makes to fight Campion as part of proving himself. More tense music, and Thlaeli, as Bigwig will be referred to in Ephrafa, is recovering from being marked as he speaks to the north-east English-sounding Campion, who has once again been merged with Chervil to make the plot simpler. The mark has seemingly been inflicted by biting rather than the implied claw strike of the book, which was reflected in the 1978 film. Bigwig is briefed on his duties by Campion and also encounters Blackavar, Campion chillingly referring to him meeting a blacker rabbit than himself one day, this version's only nod towards the proper name for the black emissary. Campion also tells Slaley about the group of does who asked to leave recently, complaining about overcrowding. They were split up between the marks, and he introduces Newell Fisher and Heisenthal. Sadly, there is no Thethuthinang. Neither of them have a northeast English accent, which might imply that it is supposed to be the accent of just the near hind mark. In such a controlled warren as Ephrafa, each mark having its own accent would be feasible, I suppose. In any case, being introduced to these rebellious does gives Bigwig his first contact for organising the escape, especially when Campion also tells Slaley he can send for any doe in the mark he wants to. There has been no need for Slaley to encounter the does by himself, or hear Heisenthal's poetry. Later, underground, Heisenthal arrives at Bigwig's burrow. He rapidly briefs her on who he is and the plan. This Heisenthal is psychic, as in the book, and using strange echoing speech predicts a rope snapping and a rabbit riding in a hrududu. This to Bigwig means he can trust her. She tells him that any does they take mustn't be told the plan until the last minute. Bigwig also insists they will take Blackavar. Back at the river, Kihar arrives after meeting with Bigwig. We have not heard this meeting, but Bigwig has told her that the escape will happen at sunset tomorrow. They are to be waiting by the arch under the iron road. Back at Ephrafa, it is time for the escape. Newell Fisher makes her ill-advised comments to Campion about surprises and rabbits growing wings and flying. We hear Heisenthal's exasperated reaction on hearing this. Bigwig is about to initiate the escape when Woundwort calls him. Slaley has been seen taking risks going near a large gull. Such birds aren't in season. The same officer who reported this also mentioned seeing a group of Hlessi a few days before. He was sure Slaley, with his distinct look, was with them. Bigwig plays innocent, but Woundwort says he will be leading out a wide patrol to look for this group, and Slaley will be joining them. Woundwort's withering tone makes it clear he no longer fully trusts Bigwig. Under the arch, Hazel tries to work out what is going on. Kihar says it was definitely meant to happen tonight. Fiver says he can't sense anything. There is a sound of distant thunder. Bigwig and Heisenthal are talking nervously. All the does know about the plan now, and she is terrified. Bigwig says he will get a message to Kihar. We do not learn how Bigwig manages this, but Kihar arrives back at the river to say that the escape is on for that next night for sure. This apparently provides a lot more clarity than in the book, where Bigwig has to use the false charm to try desperately to tell Kihar what is happening. Back in Ephrafa, Newell Fisher has been arrested, and there is an order that no one is to leave the warren. Bigwig decides they have to go immediately, despite the fact that Kihar will not be there to help them. Above ground, Bigwig casually tells an Owsler officer called Marjoram that early Silflay has been ordered. This is the point of no return. He orders Blackavar brought up. At the river, Fiver and Blackberry tell Hazel he must stay with the punt while the rest of them go to the arch. At Ephrafa, Blackavar arrives. Slaley tells Marjoram that Silflay is cancelled after all and tells him to look outside to see why. While Marjoram is distracted, Bigwig quickly tells Blackavar he will need his help in a moment. Blackavar gets far less notice of what is happening than in the book, as Bigwig then viciously attacks Marjoram, telling Blackavar to hold down the terrified Owsler member when he is done. This Blackavar is clearly in better condition than in the book. It is only now that Blackavar is told about the escape, having been asked to help in the attack on an Owsler officer for no clear reason. I'm not sure this works. In any case, Blackavar decides to join them. The escape begins to the accompaniment of the same warlike theme that we heard before Hazel was shot. The rain is pouring. There is no sign of Kihar, and Campion is already in pursuit. Blackavar offers to fight him, but Bigwig says to keep going. And then we hear Woundwort join the chase, threatening to kill Slaley, immediately followed by Kihar, who attacks him. Possibly at the arch, Bigwig meets Dandelion and Silver, both of whose voices I must admit I've had difficulty telling apart, one of the downsides of audio drama. Bigwig tells Silver to get the does and Blackavar to the boat. He and Dandelion will help Kihar. The music reaches a crescendo. Back at the punt, Hazel and Fiver are desperately trying to get the escapees onto the boat, but they won't move without Bigwig, and then he arrives. They are about to break the rope when they realise that Dandelion is missing. Woundwort and his Owsla arrive at the riverbank and he prepares to attack. They spot Dandelion. He is trapped. Bigwig distracts Woundwort by pretending to spot Keehar. Dandelion makes a run for it. The rope breaks and they float away safe. Woundwort shouts after them that he will find them. I think it is Fiver who comments that Woundwort is not like the rest of them. He knows nothing of defeat, a line that is added from the original story. Hazel has a conversation with Bigwig and his future mate Hyzenthay, according to Tales from Watership Down. Keehar arrives and says she will return to the big water, but she will see them again on the big hill. After an interlude, we are back on Watership Down. There has been no account of the journey back, which is surely the least dramatised section of the original story. The 2002 play was far better in this regard. The narrator says this is a return for some and an arrival for others. They arrive back to the news that Clover is going to kindle. All seems well. But the narrator points out that there is always one more bitter frost before spring. Holly and Blackavar have spotted Woundwort at his great patrol. Everyone is ordered underground and the holes are ordered filled in. Hazel goes to talk to Woundwort. Their conversation is a good summary of the one from the book, with the narrator making explicit Woundwort's missed opportunity to show some vision. He tells Campion to tell Captain Vervain to bring his troops up. Oh good, Vervain's back. The music reaches a thumping climax. Battle is close. The Efrathans are digging their way into the warren as the rabbits inside discuss what might happen. And then Fiver begins to go into a trance. In amongst a jumble of words about escaping across the River Enbourne, he suddenly barks, then says he feels cold and goes into a stupor. But he has done his job. Hazel has an idea. He takes Dandelion and Blackberry with him and tells Bigwig to hold the fort. He is off to gnaw another rope. Campion tells Woundwort they are ready to break through. Woundwort doesn't expect much of a fight, especially as three have already run off into the night. We are back at Nuthanger Farm. Blackberry is left at the bottom of the lane and Hazel and Dandelion go to the farm itself. As the Efrathans dig their way into the honeycomb, Bigwig says he will dig himself into the floor of the passageway behind which everyone is hiding. At Nuthanger Farm, Hazel is nearly through the rope. A cat is approaching. Dandelion shows himself to the dog, and they are gone. Hazel lands badly on his leg, and the cat has him. On Watership Down, General Woundwort gives his troops a speech about dealing with traitors and thieves. The Woundwort of the book was very much just focused on practicalities. Campion breaks open the new entrance to the honeycomb. Woundwort has no sooner landed in it than Bigwig reveals himself. The whole point of burying him was to provide the element of surprise so he could injure Woundwort, but it is not at all clear here that he has done this. The narrator tells us of their brutal struggle, eventually fighting to a standstill out of exhaustion. Holly asks the slurring Bigwig to let him take over. Bigwig declines. They engage again. Dandelion reaches Blackberry, who is terrified he won't make it. Dandelion tells him the others are depending on him. The barking dog follows him. Woundwort comes away from the fight and tells Vervain to go and finish Bigwig off. But Vervain is no fool. His effective refusal, saying Thalia has had the best of it since he arrived in Ephrafa, earns a stinging rebuke about his being the most hated officer in Ephrafa. With no background for him here, this line doesn't quite land. And then Bigwig interrupts them, losing all the progress into the warren Woundwort has made. He delivers the message that his chief has told him to defend this run. There is no message of commiseration for their deaths from a reviving Fiver. Vervain has barely had time to absorb what Bigwig said, before the dog arrives on Watership Down. The pounding, warlike music returns. Woundwort desperately shouts that dogs aren't dangerous. Here he isn't sounding quite so tough now. The dog growls. Bigwig is in a bad way. Hazel has made it back. Just as they think Bigwig might be dying, he impersonates Keehar, asking, "Is finish Woundwort?" We then learn that Hazel was saved from the cat by a human child and brought back to the down in a crudidu. Heisenthal remembers her dream in Ephrafa, and Bigwig says that if Fiver believes them, then so will he. The narrator tells us of Woundwort and how his body was never found. She adds that Ephrafa became a better place under Campion's leadership, and some Ephrafans joined the Warren on Watership Down, where Hazel was determined they would be accepted. And suddenly, our narrator is on the down itself, praising Hazel Ra, for she is Heisenthal herself, and has been all along. Hazel is older now. He speaks with Heisenthal and Fiver, recalling what Fiver once said about that other place where we go when we dream. As he goes, Fiver nearly says something. Both he and Heisenthal can sense that he is coming. In his burrow, Hazel has an unexpected guest, a rabbit whose eyes are red with a light that gives no light, and whose voice echoes with a whisper. He invites Hazel to join his Owsla. Above ground, the stranger invites Hazel to come along on a new odyssey. But Hazel says that he has just stopped running. No, says the stranger. The running is just beginning. The narrator tells us that they slip away through the wood, where the first primroses are beginning to bloom. Comparison with the book. The main thing I liked about this version of the second half of the original story was its coverage of the planning and escape from Ephrafa, although the means by which Bigwig communicates with Kihar are left a bit unclear. The escape down the river and journey back to Watership Down was far better covered in the 2002 radio play, which did surprise me. However, this may be explained by the time taken over the preparations for the escape. As for the siege of Watership Down, it does seem to be a shame to have included the vile character of Vervain if Fiver did not get to terrify him with his apology for his death. There simply wasn't enough context provided for the way Woundwort spoke to him following his refusal to take over fighting Bigwig. As far as the ending goes, this version plumped firmly for Hazel's visitor being the Black Rabbit of Inlay, and without the context of the tale of the Black Rabbit, that was okay. In any case, the ending passed the acid test of making me cry. But it did have the unfair advantage of me listening to it on the day before my father's funeral. Overall then, I enjoyed this version of Watership Down. It was the first truly modern portrayal of the story, and was a suitable prelude to the next version we will be looking at. Prepare yourselves. Next time, we introduce the 2018 Netflix series.